Hey everyone, it's Dustin here, and you may already know me as Colin's editor. I basically edit all of Colin's podcasts, and I used to do the editing on SideQuest before Maddie jumped in. I'm also the host of the HP Podcast, the best gaming podcast that I am positive you have never heard of, so check that out. In case you didn't already know, SideQuest is now a joint effort between Maddie and myself from here on out. There's a full post over on the CLS Patreon about all the changes that we're doing to SideQuest if you want to know more. The long and short of it is, you can expect new episodes of SideQuest every week from us going forward. Alright, enough housekeeping. Let's get to the main topic of this video. You may have heard recently that the once PlayStation second-party studio Ready at Dawn is no longer an independent studio. On June 22nd, 2020, Facebook announced via their Oculus blog that Ready at Dawn would be joining their lineup of Oculus studio teams. This came as a bit of a surprise, as Ready at Dawn cut their teeth as a new developer working on Sony-owned franchises for the PSP, and eventually grew to release their own PS4 AAA release with The Order 1886. In this video, we're going to take a look at Ready at Dawn's history of releases with PlayStation, as well as their more recent work in VR. We can even speculate a little bit about what happened to this once extremely promising second-party PlayStation studio that would eventually lead them to be bought by Facebook. Ready at Dawn was founded by ex-Blizzard devs Rue Virasuria and Andrea Pacina. Also part of the founding team was former Naughty Dog dev Didier Malafont in 2003. Together, they saw an opportunity with the upcoming PlayStation Portable. In an interview with Game Informer, Andrea said, quote, "This is a fantastic opportunity for someone who thinks they have something to say in the world of consoles, to do so without having to build immediately a 50 to 60 person team." It was actually Jason Rubin, one of the co-founders of Naughty Dog, who suggested they try to pitch a game using one of their IPs, specifically Jak and Daxter. They pitched the idea of a Daxter-focused PSP game to Shuhei Yoshida, the president of Worldwide Studios at the time, with nothing more than a pamphlet detailing their vision and a few drawings. Despite initially being told that Sony would get back to them in a few weeks, Sony producer Grady Hunt rushed to meet them at the elevator after the meeting to tell them they had the gig. This was all before they even had a name for the studio. After struggling to find a name they all agreed on, an idea was thrown out to use the initials of the three founders, RAD for Rue, Andrea, and DDA. It was then DDA that came up with the idea with the final name from those initials, and thus, Ready at Dawn was born. The founders Rue and Andrea described the development of Daxter as a nerve-wracking and less than ideal experience. Beginning its development in 2004 in a small leased office, the team didn't have a development kit for PSP, or even the final specs of the device to work off of. Andrea describes being so stressed about the project, he would wake up in a cold sweat, even when sleeping for just 2 hours. Thankfully, their hard work paid off when Daxter released March 14, 2006, and was met with critical praise. IGN gave the game a 9 out of 10, stating, quote, "Daxter is simply an outstanding PSP game that brings back the old-school platform gaming the industry has been shying more and more away from. Sure, its story is kind of ridiculous and even a little boring, but the events that said story lead into are fantastic. From the great level design to the ultra-refined controls to the excellent production values, Daxter is a game every PSP gamer should check out." End quote. Other outlets were in agreement as well, with the overall Metacritic score sitting high at an 85% positive rating. After the success of Daxter, the team already had the pitch for their next premier PSP game. After playing and loving the first God of War game on the PlayStation 2, their ambition was set to create a full-fledged God of War game on the PSP, and not just a portable knockoff. Ready at Dawn worked directly with the team at Sony Santa Monica to create a canon prequel chapter in the God of War saga. 2 years after the release of Daxter on March 4th, 2008, God of War Chains of Olympus was released to an even higher critical acclaim. G4TV, RIP, gave the title the highest possible score of 5 out of 5 stars. Overall, the game is the highest scoring PSP title on Metacritic, sitting pretty with a 91% average scores with 0 negative reviews. Pretty good if you ask me. The next game Ready at Dawn would work on would be born over a chance encounter over drinks at GDC. Rue had met with one of the VPs from Capcom after the event and described to him how seeing the Capcom published game Okami had made him feel good to be an artist. Ready at Dawn would soon be commissioned and begin work on porting the game to the Nintendo Wii. This proved to be a more difficult task than you might think. Since Clover Studio, the creator of the original PS2 game, had been shut down by Capcom, gathering all the original assets was an impossible task. Assets were sent to Ready at Dawn in chunks, and even then there were still things missing that needed to be recreated from scratch. On top of that, the code that Clover Studio wrote was specifically made for the PlayStation 2, so extensive parts of it needed to be remade. Despite all the hurdles, the studio delivered a fantastic port of the game that even improved on the original, with features like a true 16:9 aspect ratio and 480p progressive scan support in addition to the fluid motion controls that the Wii offered. And no, Ready at Dawn was not responsible for the IGN watermark fiasco on the box art. We can probably blame Capcom for that one. The final game the team would make for the PSP would be God of War: Ghost of Sparta, another canon entry into the franchise. With 2 games on the platform under their belt, Ready at Dawn was able to push the PSP to its maximum potential. This meant more enemies on screen, more bosses, and higher quality environments. Just like its predecessor, Ghost of Sparta was also met with critical acclaim, scoring an 86 average on Metacritic. IGN's review stated the game looked, quote, better than a big chunk of PS2 games, and is absolutely the best looking game on PSP thus far. At this point, Ready at Dawn had spent 8 years working on other studios' IP, and felt that it was time to make something fresh. A new IP from Ready at Dawn was pitched to Sony in 2010, with only a few concept art images that were lightly animated in Adobe After Effects. The plan was to go all the way in creating a true next-gen title for the upcoming PlayStation 4. And just like that, the Order 1886 was born. The game was first announced at E3 2013 with an exciting cinematic trailer that showed the game's unique vision of an alternate reality London.
We are proud to have Ready at Dawn developing an exclusive title for PS4. As you know, they developed 3 of the highest quality PSP titles with us and have grown into one of the world's most respected studios.
A world where the Knights of the Round Table still existed, but somehow still felt embedded in real history. It's far from historical, but not quite fantasy or steampunk either. The title had another new trailer at E3 2014 with a release date of February 20th, 2015. Unfortunately, The Order 1886 had its fair share of controversies leading up to release. For example, the game director Dana Jan had a bit of a controversial interview with website Kotaku. A large portion of the interview was about the game's frame rate, which we know is one of those buzzwords for gamers that can instantly enrage them, sometimes rightfully so. Dana said, quote, 60 FPS is really responsive and cool. I enjoy playing games in 60 FPS. But one thing that really changes is the aesthetic of the game in 60 FPS. We're going for the filmic look. So one thing we immediately knew was film runs at 24 FPS. We're going to run at 30 because 24 FPS doesn't feel good to play. So there's one concession in terms of making it aesthetically pleasing because it has to feel good to play. If you push that to 60, and you have it look the way we do, it actually would end up looking like something on the Discovery Channel, like an HD TV kind of segment, or a sci-fi original movie maybe, which doesn't quite have the kind of look and texture that we want from a movie. Then, on top of it, I don't know of any other games that are going to look like our game in real time with no pre-rendered movies with all the stuff going on lighting-wise and run at 60 FPS. I think that's probably the thing that most people underestimate is that to make a game look like this, the way they're lit, the number of directional lights that we don't have a game where you're just outside in the sunlight, so there's one light. We have candles flickering, fires, then characters have lights on them. So to make all of those lights work, with the fidelity means, I think, until the end of the system, most people won't have any clue to make that run 60 and look like this. Many commenters and game critics strongly disagreed with the statements made in this interview, criticizing the idea that aesthetics are more important than the way the game feels.
The fact that this is coming out of the mouth of a supposedly experienced developer is something that boggles my mind. And that is treating gamers as complete and total idiots. Not to mention it's damn insulting to all the other developers that managed to make games that did look a hell of a lot better than Order 1886 does, and still managed to maintain 60 frames per second, admittedly.
This is an interesting one because at this point many games were running at 30 FPS, so running at that frame rate was nothing new, but the way Dana Jan defended it seemed to ruffle some feathers. Unfortunately, this little interview snafu wouldn't even compare to what was coming next. The entire game leaked onto YouTube just 4 days before the game's release. The biggest issue though was around the overall game time of the playthrough clocking in at just 5 hours. This would only end up being partially true as most playthroughs would end up averaging around 7 hours. Whether it's 5 or 7 though, the damage was done. At this point, potential buyers instantly became skeptical of the overall value of the $60 purchase. The skepticism was cemented when the reviews of the game came in at less than favorable, at an average of 62 on OpenCritic.com. Critics were all in agreement that the game was one of the best looking games to hit the market, but fell short in every other way, such as gameplay, story pacing, and more. To be fair though, critics were not in complete agreement, as over a dozen verified outlets gave the game at least an 8 out of 10. In the end, we don't have the exact sales data on how well the Order 1886 sold. In an interview with Polygon, the creative director and studio founder Rue Virasoria that we were talking about earlier said, quote, "I would say it's been pretty steady since the game has been released. Of course, counting out the first few months for any game is pretty huge, it's been steady." End quote. So, what went wrong with the Order 1886? Nearly everyone can agree that, for the time especially, the title truly showcased what was possible on the PlayStation 4. The Order arguably had the best console graphics we had ever seen to date. When asked about the shortcomings of the game in the same Polygon interview, he said, quote, "I think the shortcomings come from so much concentration on building an IP at the very beginning. We were so dead set on making sure this IP had a foundation, a big foundation, that stories could be told in so many different ways. At one point, the story and the IP were driving a lot of the work we were trying to do. It's kind of natural when you start a very new game. You've seen that with new IPs in the past. We're not the first ones. There's been many IPs in the past that were firsts, and if you look at the level of gameplay and complexity, oftentimes it's much smaller than it might be in a sequel. You need to set up the IP. You don't have time to do everything, so you rely on fewer mechanics." End quote. To me though, there's so many factors around the Order that it's impossible to pin down one specific shortcoming onto why it failed overall. It was a perfect storm of the leaked game time mixed with poor critical reception, all at a $60 price tag. On a personal level, I played the game a week or two after launch by renting it at my local Family Video. And honestly, I had a really fun time playing through it. I love the visuals, the setting, the overall concept of King Arthur's knights continuing long into an alternate history. So for the $6 or so I paid to rent the game, I left with an overall positive experience. So much so that later in the year I actually bought the collector's edition from Amazon for only $14.76. And yeah, Sir Galahad defends my bookshelf to this day. I don't want to open a whole can of worms here, but experiences like this really make me stop and consider how the price of a game can affect our overall enjoyment and feeling towards a game. If I had paid $60, my overall expectations would have been very different, and the feeling of needing to get my perceived value out of my money I spent would have been in the back of my mind the entire time. But for that $6 rental, those expectations were thrown out the door. Even though I knew about the poor reviews, because I wasn't spending that, high price tag of $59.99, it didn't even bother me when I was playing it. I didn't even think about it. I could just enjoy the game for what it was. I don't disagree even with the reviews. I think the reviews are really accurate. Some of the story pacing is weird, and, the gameplay can not always be spot on, but it really changed the way I think about video games and review scores. Sometimes it's hard to remember that review scores and reviews in general are subjective. Sure, we can look at the total Metacritic score and get an overall vibe on what a game is like to play, but you're never going to truly know until you play it for yourself. So if something sparks your eye, go for it. Check it out. Even if the reviews are poor, you might just find a game that you really like despite its flaws. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now. So, after the release, very little was heard about the potential for a follow-up. Rumors of a sequel would pop up on various places around the internet, but nothing really verifiable ever rose to the top. As for Ready at Dawn, the studio first moved on to a smaller title called Deformers, a small party brawler game where you play as cute little ball-shaped creatures. Yeah, like this watermelon guy here. He's kind of cute. Like I said before, this game was much smaller in scope, especially compared to The Order, and they did this game in a partnership with Game Trust, which at the time was a new publishing arm of the retail store GameStop. Fortunately, this game didn't fare too well either, sitting at a mostly negative on Steam. I played it myself, and this one didn't really speak to me. Luckily, all was not lost for Ready at Dawn. On July 20th, 2017, the studio released its first VR title in partnership with Oculus Studios called Lone Echo. This game really stands on its own as a totally unique VR experience that revolves around the player experiencing zero gravity. featuring a robust single-player campaign and its own Ender's Game-style multiplayer, Lone Echo quickly became a must-play title for the Oculus. It was met with huge critical acclaim, sporting numerous awards for being the best VR game of the year in 2017. Eventually, the multiplayer component was broken out of the package for its own free-to-play release called Echo Arena. They even expanded on that as well with a new mode called Echo Combat. There is a sequel coming out called Lone Echo 2. It was announced in 2018, and it's expected to launch by the end of 2020. Now, with Ready at Dawn's new success in VR and their strong partnership with Oculus, many were left wondering about what the outcome of The Order and Ready at Dawn's second-party relationship with Sony would be. Many began to wonder if the once-long relationship with Sony had soured, leaving the studio to look for new partnerships. Surprisingly, The Order showed up in the headlines once again this past January, when a NeoGAF leaker named Osiris Black made a post hinting at a sequel coming to PlayStation 5. So, could a sequel to The Order be on the way for a next-gen release? After months of silence on all fronts, we finally got a partial answer when on June 22nd on the Oculus blog, it was announced that Ready at Dawn would be joining the lineup of Facebook-owned Oculus Studios. So this announcement answered the question for many of us on if Ready at Dawn and Sony would be working together in the future. Now that they're owned by Facebook, I think we can safely assume that that will not be the case. Though there could be a chance that Sony does a sequel without Ready at Dawn since they own the IP. So, the big question is, what happened between Sony and Ready at Dawn? For the moment, we can really only speculate. I do have a few thoughts of my own, but this is speculation, don't take anything I say as fact. It's clear that The Order 1886 didn't live up to commercial or critical expectations. While doing the research for this video, a lot of the information came from Game Informer's excellent documentary video about the history of Ready at Dawn. There's a link for that video in the description, so if you want to check it out, it's really well done. In that documentary, it's clear that they value their independence as a developer. There's strings attached though, as with that freedom comes the burden of having to repeatedly find funding for the next project. With The Order 1886 being the largest project they had worked on yet, the team grew in numbers significantly, pushing to at least over 100 people. With the larger staff comes an increased financial burden. With the tight community culture at Ready at Dawn, I'm sure the pressure was on to avoid layoffs at all costs. After letting go 13 members of its staff in 2010, a post on their website blog stated, quote, "Most days we feel privileged to do what we do. Some days, not so much. Today just plain sucks. We've spent the majority of our time at Ready at Dawn hiring the best and most talented people to join our team. Today, we had to let go of 13 of these people because we simply couldn't keep them on board while one project finishes and another ramps up. Unfortunately, these are the woes of being independent. It sucks. There are no other words for it." So, imagine the scenario like this, and again, this is speculation. You're part of the leadership at Ready at Dawn, and you now have a much larger team than before because you hired up to work on your first big AAA release that was underperforming in a few different ways. Your longtime publishing partner Sony isn't exactly pleased, and while they still may be willing to work with you again, it may not be at the same budget as before. You've tried diversifying your studio's income, one of them being a complete flop, and the other is a huge success in a blossoming new format. What are your options at this point? You could lay off a large portion of your staff to roll the dice on another console project and keep your freedom, or follow up on your latest groundbreaking success with a partner with extremely deep pockets, all with the benefit of keeping your current staff employed. Who knows? Maybe Sony didn't want to work with Ready at Dawn at all after The Order. There's just too many variables that we don't know the details of. My overall point though is that Ready at Dawn from the very beginning, working on Daxter, was hungry to create groundbreaking experiences for the platforms they were working on. Many thought a God of War game on PSP would be impossible to do right, and they ended up making two of the most beloved games on the system. Regardless on your thoughts on The Order 1886, it's undeniable that the game was groundbreaking from a visual standpoint in 2015, and set a new bar for what graphics could look like on the PlayStation 4 at the time. They went on to create the first killer app on the Oculus Rift with Lone Echo, and redefined what was possible in a VR game. So while you may think of Ready at Dawn only for their shortcomings on The Order 1886, I challenge you to view the broader picture and see them for the truly innovative studio that they are. And that's it for our in-depth look into Ready at Dawn. I hope you guys enjoyed this video because I know I had a ton of fun researching and making it. As I said at the beginning of the video, side quests will now be happening every week, so you'll be able to expect a brand new, amazing, awesome, incredible video from Maddie next Wednesday. So, if you're not already subscribed here on Colin's Last Stand Side Quest, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, that way you can get notified about new episodes of Side Quest, along with podcasts and all the other good things we have here on this channel. Last but not least, make sure to check us out over at patreon.com/Colin's Last Stand, where you can support this show financially, along with getting a bunch of awesome perks, such as early ad-free access to the various podcasts we offer. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.